In today's new episode, we speak with old friend Bill Thomas about his sister's murder case as part of the Colonial Parkway Murders. And Lance, there's been a big update in this case just recently from the FBI, and we speak with Bill about that. How'd you like this conversation?
Well, first of all, it's been far too long since we've had Bill on the show. He is an old friend, like you said, but he isn't old in the sense of age. I mean, the guy has been a friend of ours for a long, long time. He's got a great show, Mind Over Murder, that he produces and co-hosts and co-writes with Kristin. It's a fantastic show, and it's primarily geared towards finding answers for his sister in the Colonial Parkway murders. Now, his sister, Cathy Thomas, and her girlfriend, Rebecca Dowski, are officially considered the first two victims, at this point at least, of the Colonial Parkway murders. And Bill's been crusading to find who is responsible for their deaths and the deaths of the other victims as well. So on a few different levels, I love this conversation because it was great to get him back on the air here and to hear the new news, the exciting news about this. The other reason, because he's just a good dude and he was great to talk with.
Yeah, he is. And he always is great to speak with. And so when Bill Thomas met with the FBI on January 20th, 2026, they informed him that Alan Wilmer murdered his sister, Cathy Thomas, and her girlfriend, Rebecca Dowski. And that double murder happened on October 9th, 1986, by the way. So this is obviously a case that Bill and his family have been following for a very long time.
And again, be sure if you want the most extensive coverage on this, check out Mind Over Murder, Bill and Kristin Dilley's podcast. The link to that show is in the show notes.
Okay, so let us know what you think about this conversation on YouTube or Spotify. Please follow us on social media. We're going to break quick for commercial here, and we'll be right back with Bill Thomas. Welcome back to the podcast, Bill Thomas. Bill, how are you today?
I am great, Tim. I just want to express my great disappointment. A moment ago, you had your Red Sox hat on, which made me very happy. And then you took your Red Sox hat off, which it's back.
The hat's back. Bill, how are you? It feels like it's been like 107 years since you've been on the show. You look like you've gone backwards in age. You look wonderful. What have you been up to?
Well, I think it's the sweatshirt that's doing it. My Huffer sweatshirt is really giving me that youthful vibe that I'm seeking. Plus, I'm not going outside anymore because it's
Why would you ever do that?
Effing cold here. Yep. Every morning I look out, look at the temperatures, and it's like -2, and I'm like, I don't think we should get out of bed yet.
Yeah, horrible. Yep. -7 this morning. I can't even deal with it.
Oh man, that's just awful. This is punishing. I'm glad podcasting is an indoor sport.
Same. Can you give us some background on you?
Well, let's see. I was born many years ago in the state of California. Oh, that we didn't want to go that far back? You mean more recently?
I mean, I'll hear the full history.
No, it can't be that exciting. Well, the last couple of weeks have been very interesting. I got a call a couple of weeks ago from the very nice woman from the FBI Victim Services Department. And over the past year, her job has been to call me once a month to tell me she has nothing to tell me. So this is now about 2 weeks ago. She called and left a message. I let it go to voicemail, and I thought, oh man, because there are times it's just difficult to hear we got nothing to tell you every single month. So I waited a little bit, and then I called her back, and it was a very cryptic call, as they often are with the FBI. They are very big on asking questions, and they're absolutely horrible about answering questions. She asked me if I could attend a meeting in Virginia the following week, but she wouldn't say what it was about. And I pressed, and I said, well, what are we talking about? And she said, well, we're going to be talking about developments in the Colonial Parkway murders. And I said, okay. And then I naively thought this meant that this would involve members of the Thomas family, my family, the Dowski family, Rebecca Dowski, as you both know, was my sister's girlfriend. And so my sister Cathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski are the first two victims in the Colonial Parkway murders. I naively assumed they being the FBI, meant to have the members of the Call and Hailey families there as well. And those would be the four families from the Colonial Parkway murders whose cases are being investigated by the FBI. And then she sort of hemmed and hawed a little bit and then got around to the point where she told me the Call and Hailey families were not going to be invited. And then I'm asking, well, why? And she finally got around to something which I think she might have been guilty of hiding the lead. They had a development in Cathy Thomas, my sister, and Rebecca Dowski's murder. And they wanted to meet with members of my family, members plural. I said, well, my older brother Richard, who was a Navy doctor, just died a couple of months ago. So he won't be able to attend. My younger brother Jack is in the hospital. He's going to be having heart surgery, and he won't be able to attend. And my half-sister, Stephanie, whom we discovered through the wonders of Ancestry.com during this whole investigation into the Colonial Parkway murders, she is not someone that knew my sister because she is from my father's relationship in Vietnam back in the 1960s when he did his first of 3 tours in Vietnam. So Stephanie, my half-sister, never knew my sister Cathy, although they would have gotten on like a house on fire. So I said, it's only going to be me. She said, well, will you attend? And I said, I wanted to think about it. And what I did is I hung up the phone and I called Bob Dowski, who is Becky Dowski's brother. Very similar. He's the oldest brother in the Dowski family and has often acted as their spokesperson with the FBI in an investigation into Cathy and Becky's murder. He confirmed he was attending, but he wasn't very clear on what it was we were talking about either. So we both agreed to fly to Norfolk, Virginia, interestingly, on the FBI's dime. And they were going to fly us down on a Monday, and this would have been 2 weeks ago now, and meet with us on Tuesday. And dealing with the FBI, as you both know, is just, it's such a challenge because they're not comfortable answering questions in a straightforward manner. But we had agreed to head down there, and so we headed down on Monday. But you always feel like you're banging heads with the FBI. Even simple things like I asked to be flown out first thing Monday morning. I wanted a 6 a.m. flight to get me down there as early as possible. They end up putting me on a flight that doesn't leave at 6 a.m., but leaves midday so that I don't get down there till quite late in the day. I asked for the latest flight back up here to Connecticut on Tuesday because, as I said, I don't want to rush this meeting. And what do? They put me on a 3 p.m. flight coming back when I had said, could you put me on like a 7 p.m. flight so I'm not rushed? And after a while, this begins to feel deliberate because it is. They were trying to rush me so that I got into, and Bob, so that we got into town late and we left town early. And it's just one of those really frustrating things where you just kind of throw your hands up in the air and say, I can't fight with you guys about everything.
There are probably a handful of people who don't know who Bill Thomas is, and you have a fantastic show. You have a fantastic co-host. You have done great work on this Colonial Parkway series of murders because of your sister. But can you give a little recap on what?
Absolutely.
Yeah, what those murders are, who your sister was,
sure,
and what you've done with Mind Over Murder?
Yeah. So in heading down to meet with the FBI, we're talking about my sister Cathy Thomas's murder together with her girlfriend Rebecca Dowski. And Cathy and Becky are the first two victims in a series of murders in Virginia from approximately 1986 to 1989 that are referred to as the Colonial Parkway Murders. There's a lot of information available online, and you guys have covered the case several times. So what we have with the Colonial Parkway Murders is a series of murders of couples in lovers' lanes in and around Williamsburg, Virginia. It's approximately one couple per year it's actually 3 years, 86 to 89. And then there are some other cases, other murders that took place of individual women that we thought might be related. And Kristin Dilley, my podcast partner on Mind Over Murder, sometimes called them Colonial Parkway Murders adjacent murders. Not meant in any disrespectful way, just that they happened around the same time. So over the last several years, the FBI, who were handling 2 of the double homicides in the Colonial Parkway murders, that is my sister Cathy, her girlfriend Rebecca Dowski, as well as the 1988 disappearance of a couple, Keith Call and Cassandra Hailey. Those 2 cases are FBI cases. There are 2 more double homicides in the Colonial Parkway murders that are handled by the Virginia State Police. And the reason for the differential is if they happened inside the Colonial Parkway, that's federal property. And if you die in a national park, the FBI is the lead agency. The other 2 couples, Robin Edwards and David Knobling, and Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer, who died in 87 and 89, are Virginia State Police cases. So hopefully anyone that's new to this is not swimming yet in in too much information. But it's a very challenging case in that you've got 2 different agencies working on the case. The method of killing, without getting too graphic, is quite varied, but there are these substantial similarities at the same time. You've got couples in cars, in lover's lane type situations. The couples appear to be stopped in most examples, and someone appears to roll up on them and interact with them in a way that, at least initially, may not appear threatening. And then at some point, this killer or killers seems to gain control of these couples, and then the killing starts. So this has been a long, long road. In the last 2 years, since January 2024, when the Virginia State Police announced they had a solve in one of the Colonial Parkway murders, and that's incident number 2, 14-year-old Robin Edwards and 21-year-old David Knobling. They had circled back around to retesting evidence, and they retested the rape kit in the Robin Edwards, David Knobling case, and this is something we've been begging them to do for about 5 years. And there were a lot of concerns, and these are legitimate, that there was very small amount of DNA left in Robin's rape kit. It was very badly degraded. It was over 30 years old. Plus, both Robin and David's bodies had been dumped in the water, so there was seawater contamination, etc. But we had said, and we as the families, plural, we had said to the Virginia State Police, please, our parents are dying, waiting for answers. We've lost, I think the last time I checked, it was 9 of the 16 mothers and fathers waiting for answers. And both my parents are gone, and many of the families have handed off the follow-up from parents who were initially involved to siblings like myself. So the good news is the Virginia State Police did decide to take the shot. There were concerns that this might be our last shot, but we kept saying, please just do it. Even if this is the last time we have DNA from Robin's case, time's a waste in here. So they tested it and used DNA Labs International down in Florida, and a SAKI grant, a Sexual Assault Kit Initiative grant, to pay for the outside lab testing, and they got a hit. And so they found that a man named Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., who's from Lancaster County, Virginia, which is a couple of hours north of the area where the Colonial Parkway murders took place. And this guy was what they call a waterman in Virginia. And that's somebody who makes their living on the rivers and estuaries down there off the Chesapeake Bay. And these guys are mostly men, fishermen, crabbers, very hardworking group of individuals. And this guy, Wilmer, who died in 2017, was linked via DNA to Robin Edwards and David Knobling's murder. Now, there was a curveball in that they also connected Wilmer to the homicide of a woman named Teresa Howell. And Teresa Howell had been raped and murdered after meeting someone in the parking lot, we believe, of a local nightclub, a Club Zodiac. And this would have happened in the summer of 1989. The FBI and the Virginia State Police, the VSP mostly taking the lead here, announced that Robin Edwards and David Knobling had been linked to Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. And at the same time, at the same press conference, which is now 2 years ago, they announced that Teresa Howell's rape and murder was also linked to Wilmer. Let me stop there. If people's heads aren't spinning yet, they will be soon.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Yeah, no, that's great stuff. Thank you very much for the background there. And of course, you and your partner in true crime, Kristin Dilley, launched the fantastic Mind Over Murder podcast. And I listened to your latest episode that kind of went over.
I'm so sorry.
this call and this visit to the FBI. Yeah. So on the surface, I am almost surprised that this is like the feeling from you isn't a little different. It's not so much satisfied.
Well, if the FBI could ever find their way to answering my many questions in a straightforward manner, I'd be a lot happier. Like, they've provided us with zero proof of their announcement. What they said to us at the meeting at FBI Norfolk, right out of the chute, which I appreciated. They didn't keep us waiting. They said, after we did the introductions, the SAC, Dominique Evans, her name is, said, "I'm not going to keep you waiting. Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. is responsible for the deaths of Cathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski." So, we had that bit of news. The problem and the thing I'm struggling with is that I've had a couple of weeks now to absorb the information. And so we're kind of through some of the shock of it all. But I had so many questions, as did my colleague and friend Bob Dowski, and they won't answer most of the questions. And I really pressed hard, and I said, why can't you answer these questions? Wilmer, the suspect, has been dead since 2017. We're not taking anyone to court. This case is never going to be adjudicated. Why can't you answer questions in a more straightforward manner? And you just feel like you're butting heads a lot. And they refused to answer a lot of Bob's questions, although Bob then had a second follow-up conversation with them by phone a few days later for another couple of hours. I wasn't on the call, which is, Bob's prerogative. He can talk to whoever he wants to talk to. But then I requested a meeting to answer my many follow-up questions. And so far, I'm getting the big stall. I asked for that meeting last Wednesday, and here we are recording on a Monday. I have not heard anything from the FBI to confirm that they will answer my questions. But you can't avoid comparisons here. They already answered 2 hours of Bob Dowski questions. Why won't they answer Bill Thomas questions? And I'll answer my own question here. I believe they don't want to answer my questions because I've been highly critical of the way this investigation has been handled.
But wouldn't that, why would they continue to kind of stonewall you, knowing that you've been critical, because that's only going to cause you to be more critical? Give you something here.
I would think so. And look, I'm not asking for anything that I don't believe I have a right to ask. But it just, everything about this case has always felt like pulling teeth. And the FBI has pressured me to dial it down. They actually, 2 years ago, they actually threatened me. They threatened to bring me up on federal obstruction of justice charges in my sister's murder investigation because I had a tip that was incomplete. I was able to nail down the rest of the details and come back to them with the complete information. It took about 2 weeks, but during that 2-week period, they were actually threatening to take legal action against me in my sister's murder investigation. And at one point I said to the case agent, who's since retired, on what planet would I refuse to provide information in my sister's unsolved murder case? If you guys haven't figured this out after, at that time it was 37 years, now we're at 39. If you haven't figured out after 37 years that I really want to see the Colonial Parkway murders solved, I don't know what to say. You know, I don't think I'm that difficult to read. And all I was looking for was answers. And it's crazy situations like that where there's just an endless refusal to answer the most basic questions. One thing I really appreciated at the meeting, I asked the question over the table, who did the work? Who did the outside lab work? And they said DNA Labs International, who are a highly respected company out of Florida. And I actually know some of the people that work there because I've made it my business to meet as many people in this true crime space, particularly experts, because I find I learn things from talking to these folks. The FBI did answer that question in a straightforward manner. They said DNA Labs International. And then I confirmed. So that means that DNA Labs International so far has done all the work in the murders that have been identified as part of this series now. So we have Robin Edwards and David Knobling, as we talked about, Teresa Howell, and then in November 2025, the Virginia State Police held another press conference to announce that the murder of Lorianne Powell had also been linked to Wilmer again. And Lorianne Powell was a young woman who was stabbed to death and her body was dumped in an area river in a very similar fashion to several of the other Colonial Parkway murders. So that brought us to 4 all Virginia State Police cases. And then with this new meeting, the FBI has added 2 more to the list. I was about to call it an announcement, but this is something that really shocked both Bob and I. The FBI did not hold a press conference to announce that Cathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski's murder had been solved. So they didn't afford us any opportunity to add anything in terms of how we'd like our sisters to be remembered. They sprung a written press release on us at exactly 9 a.m. when the meeting started. And that meant that, very unfortunately from our perspective, our families found out who killed our sisters, not from Bill Thomas or Bob Dowski, and we had been sent to Virginia by our families in order to get this information. No, because the FBI is obsessed with power and control, they end up dropping a press release while we're in the meeting. And so my family found out who killed Cathy, and Becky's family found out who killed Becky from the World Wide Web, which is not how we're supposed to be doing this. So back here at home, Pamela, my partner's phone was ringing with press people wanting to talk to me. And they found her name on our Facebook page and things like that. So the next thing you know, people are calling her. That's how she found out who killed Cathy. And it's just wrong. And this is all because the FBI couldn't find a way to coordinate with us in advance. The Virginia State Police families, by the way, have attended 2 different press conferences, and the FBI refuses to hold a press conference, refuses to give Bob and I even an opportunity to add a sentence or two about how we'd like our sisters to be remembered. And then because they don't tell us in advance, our families find out about this from the World Wide Web. And this cannot continue. This is a horrible way for a law enforcement agency to treat families.
Yeah, that's very disappointing. I did see that press release early on that day, and I actually, it dawned on me, I was like, I feel like that meeting cannot be over at this point. So I was a little confused by that because I saw it being posted on social media as well. But I knew you had the meeting too.
The weird thing is, Tim, in that press release, when you look at it, and I was in communications, corporate communications, for a number of years. I know how these things are supposed to be done. In that press release, they actually thanked Bill and Bob by name for attending the announcement. There was no announcement. All there was a press release. So somehow the Virginia State Police can see their way to having a press conference, allowing reporters to ask questions, allowing the families to say something about their loved ones, and also thank the investigators and experts who've been working on this case for going on 40 years. And I would have actually done the same thing, but there were things that weren't even in the press release. Like the press release never mentioned that my sister Cathy was a graduate of the United States Naval Academy in the second class with women, which is a real big deal to my family. My dad, who's passed away, my older brother, who's now passed away, and my younger sister Cathy were the first father, son, daughter graduates of the Naval Academy. And that's something that my family takes great pride in. And that's something that, is to Cathy's credit. She was a pioneer and a badass and a lot of other wonderful things. I would have had a lot of nice things to say had I been permitted to say them. And this is troubling. And I said over the table to the SAC, the special agent in charge, you're not having a press conference? And I looked at her, and there may have been even a finger pointed. You need to hold a press conference. You need to take questions on this case. And of course, the reason they don't want to take questions on this case is there's so many problems in this investigation. I could go on. We could do a whole nother episode on how many different things have been handled improperly in the Colonial Parkway Murders investigation. It's shocking how badly this case has been handled by FBI Norfolk. That's why they don't want to have a press conference, and that's why they don't want Bill Thomas to talk on the air. It saddens me that today's FBI can't find a way to acknowledge that mistakes were made, answer questions in a straightforward manner, and move the case forward. Instead, it's always about the FBI wants to protect its reputation. If you haven't figured it out yet, folks, the FBI is obsessed with its own reputation. And that's actually job one in the FBI, is making the agency look good.
Well, they're failing because we hear all these stories all the time. I mean, the FBI doesn't exactly have a pristine reputation in the eyes of most of the public, and your story is just a backup to that perception, because there is no reason for them to not allow you to have your story told, for you to say your piece, especially with something as significant as the Colonial Parkway Murders. And it is kind of astonishing that they don't have somebody like assigned, some sort of PR person assigned to say, here's how you handle an acknowledgement of how a case was mishandled. And it's fine. I think people would. Do you think that people would accept that from the FBI if they owned up to it?
I think they would. I mean, look.
I do too.
There's a reason why cases go cold. We understand that. And things happened. And, the SAC made a point. She recorded a video. Notice how she has an opportunity to record a video, but I don't have an opportunity to record a video. And that's deliberate. We all understand that mistakes happen. And when a case is stretched out for almost 40 years, of course stuff is going to go south. Now, the good news is, and this is very exciting, the DNA technology, as you guys have reported on, the forensics have gotten so much better, even from 5 years ago. It's a vastly improved scientific template that we can work with now, which is why so many cold cases are getting solved. Don't get me wrong, I'm thrilled about the news. And when you've been looking for answers for 39 and a half years, to have some answers is very significant. We knew for years that with the case stretching on as long as it did, we knew there was a good chance that some or all of the offenders involved, and there may be multiple offenders here, although Wilmer's the only one who's been identified so far. But we knew there was a good chance that when something's been dragging on for 39 plus years, that the offenders were going to be dead. So we're willing to accept the fact that this isn't a perfect world, and I'd much rather have answers than no answers. But by obsessing on doing everything they can to avoid answering any kind of critical question, the FBI just ends up twisting themselves in knots and doing crazy stuff like threatening me, which it's not a good feeling. I actually want the Federal Bureau of Investigation to succeed and to be able to do its job. But just, refusing over and over and over again to answer basic questions and even just tell the truth about what happened, take the hit. There's going to be some criticism. I've had plenty of criticism of the Bureau, but I'm also appreciative of the fact that with advances in scientific methods, we now have answers that we couldn't have had back in '86.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's great that you were able to confirm through your own contacts that they used a specific lab, and it went well that way. But other than that, like what questions did they answer that you had for them?
They answered which lab did the work. They did tell us that there was DNA evidence that was on Rebecca Dowski's bra. And that obviously Wilmer, who had no relationship that we know of to my sister and her girlfriend, his DNA clearly doesn't belong on Becky's bra. So there's a question that they answered. But then we asked a follow-up question. Can you tell us what kind of DNA was it? Was it touch DNA? Was it saliva? Was it semen? They refused to answer the question. And it's like, guys, this is ridiculous. Why? We're not taking Wilmer to court. He died in 2017. There's no reason to keep this shroud of secrecy around these things. So questions like that, they still won't say when Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. moved onto their radar because, of course, they're uncomfortable with the answer. Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. was a suspect in these murders in 1988. He was a suspect in the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Hailey, which is still unsolved. They disappeared, and Keith's car was found along the Colonial Parkway. They're considered part of the Parkway series of murders, although technically it's a missing persons case, although it's been 37 years, and I don't think Keith and Sandy are walking through the door anytime soon. Their car and articles of clothing were found along the parkway. It looks like they were murdered and their bodies were disposed of elsewhere. But it's situations like that where Wilmer was a suspect in '88, and I never knew his name, but I remembered my father, who was dealing with the FBI back then, told us a story about how they were looking at two watermen who were brothers from Lancaster County, Virginia, and they strongly suspected that Wilmer, who's the middle brother of three, was directly involved in the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Hailey. They found his very distinctive truck after interviewing couples who had been harassed, I would say, some even attacked on the Colonial Parkway by a man driving this very distinctive truck. Wilmer, the FBI went up and questioned him, got a search warrant, searched his home, his very distinctive truck, his boat, which is a fishing boat called the Denny Wade. And they found a number of things which got their antenna up, which included guns, knives, handcuffs. A number of these couples were restrained, including Cathy and Becky. An extensive collection of pornography. Agents were convinced they had the right guy. Then he was questioned twice via polygraph. He passed the first polygraph test, and the second one was inconclusive. In other words, the operator can't tell you whether the person's telling the truth or being deceptive. Now, I tracked down the retired FBI polygrapher, who's the examiner who gave him the tests, and the FBI hates it when I do this stuff, and I don't care. What are they going to do, arrest me? I tracked this guy down. He was very helpful, very straightforward. He told me the story about giving Wilmer, and he said they a couple of times, so he never said the name of the second suspect, but I think it's Wilmer's older brother, Keith, who also recently passed away. But at the end of the conversation, he said to me, Bill, we should have never let that guy go. So here's the polygraph examiner saying we should have never let him go. And the SAC at the time, the special agent in charge at the time, a guy named Irv Wells, really, really great FBI man who passed away a couple of years ago again. Are we noticing a pattern here? So many years go by, we're losing all the key players. But even SAC Irv Wells said, you better effing be right about this, letting this guy go. So they let Wilmer go in 88, and then Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. just continued raping and killing, literally right under their noses for years afterwards, this is the kind of stuff that embarrasses the FBI. And I'm sorry, I'm not here to embarrass the FBI, but if we won't own the truth and just, answer questions and move on, none of us are ever going to learn anything from these lessons.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program. I'm curious why they wouldn't answer the source of the DNA. You said they wouldn't tell you if it was saliva or blood or hair, but I get why, and I'm not justifying it, I get why they wouldn't answer the question about where did this suspect come from? Because that means that they have to tell that whole story that you just told, that they have to say, oh, we were looking at him and then we actually, dismissed him as a suspect, and that, that's egg on their face. But still, they could still find a way to say that was an old, investigative unit. They could figure out a way to make that feel like...
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but what do they say when, what was their backup when they said... Or was it just no? Were they like, no, we're not going to tell you?
Just no. They were asked these questions 2 years ago at the announcement that Wilmer had been linked to Robin Edwards, David Knobling, and Teresa Howell, which was primarily a Virginia State Police announcement. But the FBI was there and they spoke. But when the question was asked twice, can you say when Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. first moved onto your radar, the spokeswoman actually said no. Just flat out, no, we will not answer that question. And this is why, because the answer is embarrassing.
Yeah.
Because they literally had him in custody and they let him go.
For the DNA part of this, do you think maybe they think that there might be somebody else out there? Maybe this wasn't just Wilmer alone, and that might impact another conviction? Maybe someone who's alive?
That I could understand. And that is a possibility. We, the families, we've done a lot of work on this case, as you both know. We are aware of a number of potential accomplices, several of whom are still alive and well. And I do get that. Lance, your point is a really, really good one and an important one. If they're going to go after accomplices in the Colonial Parkway murders, some of these guys are still alive. I actually know a lot about a number of people that at least need to be looked at by law enforcement to see whether or not they might have potential involvement. So we do have living accomplices, and that it's not an excuse. That concern is a legitimate reason to maybe not answer every question. But I mean, we're so far down into the many rabbit holes of this case. I think they could treat us like adults, which we both are, Bob and I, and just say, while we're still checking out accomplices, there are things that we probably can't say right now. I could accept that as an answer, but to just stonewall us, you end up walking out of the room with with more questions than you had walking in, and B, feeling like you're getting gaslit because they won't answer even the most basic question. If someone said, while we're still exploring accomplices, I can't get into that right now, I could get that. But to just say no, 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 and refuse to answer question after question, it's incredibly frustrating.
But do they ever answer, I don't know? And I'm asking that because I wonder if they just didn't know and they just say no. Like they'd rather, they can't bring themselves to say they don't know something.
Well, the case agent in particular, who's been handling the case for about the last 2 years, who is very impressive, she answered some questions with I don't know. I'm actually completely willing to accept I don't know as an answer. What I just hate is being treated like the enemy and being given the straight arm. The I don't know, like I asked some questions of the case agent, who was clearly the most knowledgeable person in the room, which is natural. She handles the case on a day-to-day basis. I asked her several questions and she said, I'm not sure, or I don't know. That's acceptable to me. What's not acceptable after 39 and a half years is just to be given the straight arm and just, it's almost like we don't deserve answers. And Bob said to me the next day, I felt like we got the bum's rush in there. Like they couldn't wait to get us out of the room. And it wasn't until later that I realized that they told us they sent out a press release, but I hadn't realized the impact of that would be that, our families would find out through the press and not through us. And so many other elements. And then, them thanking us for attending an announcement when there was no announcement, which, being really frank, they sent out in writing something to the American public that thanked me and Bob by name for attending an announcement that didn't happen. So at some point you have to say to yourself, you guys are like actively trying to mislead the American public regarding the status of this so-called announcement. And it's just, you end up, particularly as things settled in after, the next day and the day after, thinking, well, what else didn't you tell us? Because there's so much of this rigid, inflexible approach.
Now, have you had differences and disagreements with the FBI over the years, or is this something that's changed in the past few years?
Well, this team that took over in January 2025 have been extremely distancing. They don't talk to us. They didn't give us any updates. But there's been a lot of friction over the years behind the scenes. It's mostly centered around, and anyone that's listening to this podcast has probably figured this out, it's mostly centered around me asking questions and them refusing to answer them. And that just gets to be like a real frustrating hamster wheel of frustration. Ask questions, refuse to get answers, spin wheel, and here we go again. So that's been happening for years. And culturally, I get it. This is J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, highly secretive, obsessed with its own image. And, from their perspective, I have a big mouth. I ask too many questions. I appear on podcasts with you. Kristin, Dilly, and I start our own podcast. I'm sure there are times when they're like, this guy, Bill Thomas, this guy needs to give it a rest. But at the same time, I've provided them with dozens and dozens of tips. As you know, we've really put ourselves out there because when law enforcement wasn't answering questions about this case, we were actually out there asking people to contact us, and ultimately we want these people to talk to law enforcement. But there are a lot of people that don't trust law enforcement. They might have a reason for that. Some of these folks are from sketchy backgrounds or whatever, and there's a lot of distrust of law enforcement. But we've urged people to contact us, and then we, as best we can, turn them over to the FBI. So I've sent in dozens and dozens of tips. I type everything up, I send it in, I do my research, I try to provide them with a complete picture. They have to evaluate whether that's a valuable tip or perhaps less valuable. I get the fact that, over the years we've had 150 persons of interest in this case, thousands of tips. At one point when we met in January 2010, they said there were 5,000 documents in Cathy and Becky's file. I'm sure it's far more than that now. So we've actually tried to make ourselves a resource, but they don't like the outspoken nature of what we've done with Mind Over Murder and appearances on podcasts like this. We did a television series, Lovers Lane Murders, for the Oxygen Network a few years ago. There was a very good American detective story that ran last year with Joe Kenda, which I strongly recommend. A little less than 2 hours, but it's extremely well done. And I appear on the show, which is neither here nor there. I'm sad that I never got to meet Joe Kenda because I'm a big fan. But the FBI doesn't like all this coverage. They don't like all the questions. My point is I'm not here to beat them up. I'm just seeking answers. And now we're seeking answers in the other Colonial Parkway murders, which are not yet solved. We talked about Keith Call and Cassandra Hailey. And then incident number 4, which is a Virginia State Police case, is the murder of Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer. There's a good chance, by the way, that Wilmer may be involved in those double homicides as well. So I'm hoping we can keep their feet to the fire, if you know what I mean, to keep working this case. I appreciate the fact that they did keep working the case and they came back to us with answers. And those answers are very meaningful to my family.
And so, Bill, I'm curious, what kinds of questions did you want to ask that you didn't get a chance during this recent meeting?
Well, I would like a straightforward answer to when did Wilmer move back onto your radar? I don't mean in 88. I mean sometime around 2023, about 6 years after Wilmer died, he moved back onto the FBI's radar, but no one's ever explained to us how that happened. I'm very disappointed that they didn't keep an eye on Wilmer. Back in 86, DNA hadn't even come out of the lab yet. So there's a lot of things about this solve that just happened that just weren't, the science didn't exist back then. So there's so much about this investigation that we believe we deserve answers to. One of the key things is, how did Wilmer fall off your radar in 88? And then how did he move back onto your radar? We think it's in about 2023. It's worth talking about for a second. Wilmer died at home in his bed of heart disease at his home in Lancaster County, Virginia. He was kind of estranged from his family by that point and really in not good health. He died at home and his body wasn't found for about 3 weeks. So he was in a pretty advanced state of decomposition. And apparently, from what we're told, and I always have to put an asterisk next to these things, by the FBI and the Virginia State Police, local law enforcement conducted DNA tests to determine if these remains, which were not recognizable by that point, if this was actually Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. So there was a DNA profile created. At some point, approximately 6 years later, the FBI wanted to compare this DNA together with the Virginia State Police, and Wilmer moved back onto their radar. But for some reason, they don't want to talk about that either. We think we know why, but we'd like the FBI to tell us rather than have us guess. Some of the guesses aren't very flattering. again to the FBI. And I'm not obsessed with making them look like schmoes. I'm really not. I'm just looking for answers as to how this whole thing went down. It's that kind of thing that we find incredibly frustrating. Keith Wilmer, the older brother, is a suspect in another murder. A woman named Mary Keyser Harding was murdered in 1985 under very similar circumstances to the Colonial Parkway murders. Law enforcement always emphasized that the Wilmer brothers, the two older ones, Keith and Alan, our suspect, weren't close and likely wouldn't have collaborated on murder.
How did they know that? Sorry to interrupt. Through other people telling them the relationship?
This is based on the family. Apparently, the two Wilmer brothers, the two older Wilmer brothers, did not get along well. And I don't know.
Like, that doesn't make any difference to me. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but you know what might not create the best brotherly relationship? Killing people together. Maybe that caused a little friction between the two.
And suspicion and finger pointing.
Is he still alive, the brother, Keith?
He just died in April 2025.
Right. Sorry, I forgot that. Yeah.
I actually think there was a man named Emerson Stevens who was convicted of Mary Harding's murder. The Innocence Project got him out of jail a couple of years ago because they proved it wasn't this man, Emerson Stevens, who was also a waterman from the area. I actually think Keith Wilmer is likely her killer. His wife worked with Mary Harding at the Lancaster Bank. They were extremely close. Keith Wilmer had a horrible reputation for womanizing, and he was actually banned from the bank where his wife worked for many years, and ultimately even the parking area of the bank, for sexually harassing women going in and out of the bank where his wife worked. And this guy is a complete sleaze and often violent. And the fact that he wasn't looked at harder for the Mary Keyser Harding murder is just beyond me. And, you know, there's all these open cases that are kind of surrounding the Wilmer brothers that I think need to be investigated, even though both Wilmer brothers and now their younger brother, Tim, all three of them are dead. But as I've tried to explain to law enforcement over and over again, this isn't just about getting convictions. From the perspective of the families, we're still looking for answers. We'd like to know what happened and why and who was involved, even if people are not necessarily still alive and can be carted off to prison where they belong. And then there are these numerous accomplices, potential accomplices, that are still alive that we think need to be checked out.
Yeah, really interesting. I'm sure, as you know, the limited data shows that more serial killers than we would think of have partners or accomplices somewhere along the line. I know we've spoken with Michael Arntfield, who says, I think he quotes up to 40%, but in a quick Google, you get something around 25%. And that is still shocking to me.
These are like brothers or other relatives.
Anyone who had some knowledge of at least one of the crimes somewhere along the way, whether they helped dispose, helped set the person up, or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Like, think about couples, right? Husbands and wives. If one of them's doing something, at some point there's a suspicion there, or there's like an admission or something. So I don't even know if those people would necessarily tell anybody that either. So getting that percentage on there probably isn't, I'm sure it's way higher than that. What did you say on Google? It was 25%?
Yeah, it says around 15 to 25% from Google, but our friend Michael Arntfield from murderdata.org, he says it's closer to 40%.
Yeah, I mean, wow. I would imagine it's even more than that, again, because like that's just the people that have been caught. You know, those are the people that they're able to put those numbers to. I'm sure there's tons out there that haven't said anything.
Yeah, it's amazing. We've discovered new information, and when back in November 2025, when the Lorianne Powell news was broken via a Virginia State Police press conference, their second press conference in 2 years, by the way, while the FBI is holding no press conferences, the Virginia State Police, God bless them, have had 2 live press conferences and answered questions. There are these accomplices that are now being put forward to the families. And I said this over the table to the FBI. We have information and we're going to work to develop this. And I will obviously turn it over to law enforcement once we've had a chance to fully flesh this out, which will probably involve me heading back down to Virginia in, oh gosh, if it would just stop snowing, I would head back. But people are coming forward with new information linking other suspects with Wilmer. So Kristin Dilley actually has said something really interesting on her podcast. She actually said, I think we're talking about a murder club here, where there are a group of people, men, who seem to get off on this stuff, and they seem to be working somehow in tandem or small groups, killing young people. And it's really chilling when you think about it. These are the kind of things that keep me awake at night. But people are now coming forward and saying, I believe that this individual, who they had very unpleasant interactions with, is also tied into Wilmer. So it's really spooky to think about the fact that there could have been a small group of men who so got off on raping and killing both single women and couples, and they might have been doing this in some sort of murder club scenario. I know this sounds crazy, but it's probably not crazy.
I don't know. We live in a society today that keeps getting crazier and crazier every time I open up my news feed. So to hear that and to have, Kristin come up with that. Kristin is like one of the smartest people that I think I know in this world of true crime content creation. And she's so thoughtful in the way she'll present a theory. And the two of you work really well together in that sense. And for her to say that, like, she's just not coming from an emotional, perspective here. She's actually thinking that this could be a reality. That does say something.
And it's funny, she's not just pulling this out of her hat. She and I have been working together on the Colonial Parkway Murders for 11 years. And, of course, I've been working on this case for 39 years. It's hard to believe. But when she came up with that, it just occurred to her. And so, she said it out loud, but you know something? She may be right. And we may have a murder club that stretches back 40 years where these guys were getting off on this stuff. I've learned a lot, in recent years from talking to mostly FBI trained profilers. And they don't think this is that much of a stretch. We've actually run this past a couple of people whose opinions I really respect. And they're like, something? That it would be very rare, but it has happened. And we have had people that have collaborated on cases like this. It's kind of chilling to think about, but, we've got murders all over the place in that peninsula area of Virginia that are all happening around the same time and under very similar circumstances. Mostly young people, both single women and couples, often raped, murdered, and their bodies dumped in these area rivers, the Rappahannock, the York, the James rivers, all in and around this so-called peninsula area, not too far from Williamsburg, Virginia.
Wow. Yeah, so that was what I wanted to ask you about, was how many other cases sort of, I guess, fit the same profile?
There's a lot. One of the things we're struggling with, Tim, is we cannot load Wilmer's DNA into the CODIS system, the DNA database system, because under Virginia state law, and I'm rolling my eyes as I say this, because Wilmer was never convicted of a felony, his DNA cannot be put into CODIS. And I have said, and we're going to be pursuing this in this coming year, this law needs to be changed. why are we protecting the rights of a dead serial killer over the rights of the families in the Colonial Parkway murders? How does that serve society in any way, shape, or form? Without the capability to put Wilmer into CODIS, where one of our experts, former law enforcement officer who's worked this case, said to me, Bill, if they put Wilmer's DNA into CODIS, it would light up like an effing Christmas tree. And he's probably right. We think he could be involved in a number of other unsolved homicides. There are murders that took place within a mile of where Wilmer grew up back when he would have been like high school age, all the way up to murders that would extend into the late 80s and early 90s that may involve Wilmer. But if we can't figure out a way to get his DNA into CODIS, right now law enforcement has to do everything on a one-to-one search basis, which is accurate, but it's slow. And our case agent, we were told at the meeting, is actually going out and meeting with cold case investigators at various law enforcement agencies in Virginia. But we think they should be looking on a broader basis and using CODIS for what it's intended for, which is automated notice of if the system sees a hit that, there's literally a flashing light saying, check this out. You need to take a look at this because this guy's DNA matches evidence in one of the cases that you're investigating, some of which go back 40 plus years.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program. So with this group of people that would be involved in the murder of these innocent individuals, what's your theory on how they connect? Like, how did they connect? Family, friends?
I don't know. This is something we're trying to figure out. Oddly, there's this nightclub called the Zodiac Club, which is where Wilmer saw this woman, Teresa Howell, one of his victims. And there's a couple of other bars that we think these people may have met up at. Not being a serial killer, it's hard for me to figure out, like, how does this come up as a topic? Oh, yeah, I'm really into raping and killing women too, but it appears that it may have happened. And, we're not making this up, but it's very strange and chilling thing to think about that this group of men may have actually met and collaborated. That's the word I think I need a better word, but they may have worked together on these murders. We think that Wilmer struck out on his own, but he also may have murdered some of these people in cooperation with some of these people. There's this other very strange element to all of this, which is that a number of people in the Colonial Parkway murders have connections to a small security company called Liberty Security. And there's a man named Ron Little, who also passed away a couple of years ago, who was from New Zealand, who inserted himself into the Colonial Parkway murders in a very public way back in this same time frame. He claimed he knew who was committing the Colonial Parkway murders and even who was going to be next in the Parkway murders. Now, this guy then was deported back to New Zealand in 1989, which is when the Colonial Parkway murders appeared to stop. He went back to New Zealand and continued a life of crime in New Zealand. He was involved in meth manufacturing and distribution, gangs, car theft. He's suspected of murder in at least one example. There's a videotape, which I have not yet seen. This is something I'd prefer not to watch. There's a videotape, apparently, of Ron Little and several other men torturing a man in New Zealand. This is all related to drug trafficking. He was also involved in trafficking of young women into sex work. And he is a real sleazebag. Interestingly, his family, who approached me several years ago, this is probably 5 years ago now, They listen to the podcast. It's fascinating how many people we've met through Mind Over Murder. But the brothers, two brothers, the sons of Ron Little, told me that their father told them for decades that he was involved in a series of unsolved murders in Virginia. Of course, first of all, I think to myself, who says this kind of thing? But from his perspective, he was kind of bragging on it because he wanted to have a reputation for being sort of a badass. But he told his teenage sons he was involved in a series of unsolved murders in Virginia. And now the sons have come forward and reached out to me. And this has happened a lot. Wilmer's family has reached out to me repeatedly. I find this interesting. The FBI said to a number of these people, don't talk to Bill Thomas. And all that did was motivate these people to figure out, A, who the heck is Bill Thomas? And B, why can't we talk to him? So I get phone calls, emails, and texts from some real interesting folks. And I don't see myself as an investigator, but Kristin and I do see ourselves as victims advocates. And if we keep talking about this case, people keep coming out of the woodwork with new information. And we do our best, once we've had a chance to run it to ground, to get that information to the FBI, the Virginia State Police, or whoever the appropriate agency is. But I've met the nicest people through podcasting. At least you two aren't criminals,
well,
as far as I know.
Well, we're criminally handsome.
Well, there is that.
I mean, that goes without saying.
So that is a really interesting challenge to get Wade's DNA into CODIS.
Yeah.
It seems like an oversight that, yes, a convicted felon, that's when DNA gets put into CODIS. That's fair. That's fine. But that was probably decided long before genetic genealogy. And yes, so Wade is deceased, but he has scientifically been proven to, while it didn't happen in a court of law, he's scientifically been proven to be a culprit in some of these murders, at least. I mean, there's got to be, this is like a weird little loophole that has to be closed in some way.
Oh, we couldn't agree more, Tim, and you put it really well. You know, at this point, Wilmer's already linked to 6 homicides, and I think that number will at least double. I'm willing to bet a nice lunch that he's involved in the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Hailey. He was suspect number 1 in the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Hailey. That's how he moved on to the FBI's radar back in '88. I'm highly confident Wilmer's involved in that one, if they can find a way with the available evidence to link him to that disappearance. I think he's responsible for a number of additional unsolved murders. And I don't think I'm going out on a very skinny branch when I say that. And, I urged the FBI, and I said this over the table in the meeting, please, you've got to keep working this case. These other families deserve answers, much in the same way we've received answers. I think there's more digging that needs to be done. And I think if we can find a way to put Wilmer into CODIS, we've gotten some advice about perhaps changing the law, perhaps trying to find a way to get a court order that would allow Wilmer's DNA to be put into CODIS. We're going to try to move all these initiatives forward in the coming months. It's just another thing on the to-do list. By the way, the FBI had said they would support changing the law. Now, they don't get involved in, okay, we're going to change laws in the Commonwealth of Virginia, but they did say they would have no problem whatsoever, and they would like to see Wilmer's DNA in the CODIS system.